All right, everybody, welcome into the Pump Fake Monday after Week 10. A crazy Week 10. A lot of one-score games in the early window, and a lot of the playoff picture kind of coming into fruition more and more as we gear closer to Thanksgiving. Jarrett Bailey with you as always, joined by my good friend Matt Lombardo. Good to see you, my friend. How are you?
Jarrett, thanks for having me. What a wild weekend we just had across the NFL. I'll even go back to Thursday night. What a great game that was. A clash of the Titans in the AFC North. Bengals, Ravens goes down to the wire. Lamar Jackson with some late game heroics. And as you said, that 1 o'clock window yesterday, I think I still have whiplash from all of the one-score games and the games that were decided by a made field goal over here, or a missed field goal, or a blocked field goal over
Right.
there. Just an exciting day yesterday all around.
Yeah, well, let's start in Landover, Maryland, where two very unlikely number one teams in their division meet up. Steelers traveling to Washington to play the Commanders, and it was like, as a Steelers fan, I'm ripping my hair out throughout the entire 3 hours of the game. Starts off really solid defensively for the Steelers. They make Jaden Daniels uncomfortable. Pittsburgh has a fake punt that, if it's caught by James Pierre, maybe it's a large point swing, but it's dropped. The Commanders get an easy touchdown. And then Washington marches down the field after a long punt right before they have to score. They get the ball back after halftime, score immediately, and all of a sudden the Steelers are down 10. And then things just start going Pittsburgh's way. Russ hits a couple deep balls, throws 3 touchdowns on the day. A controversial call at the end of the game that saw Zach Ertz on live in real time. It looked like he got the first down, so I was fully prepared to see the Commanders potentially kick a game-winning field goal. They rule him short. It doesn't get overturned. Steelers force Johnny Newton to jump off sides on 4th and 1, and that kind of ices the game. Pittsburgh now 7-2, still atop the AFC North as they head into Week 11, where they'll have their first divisional game hosting the Ravens in what feels like the largest matchup between those teams in quite some time. But Steelers are real, man, and it's very cool to see them do it in a way where the past couple of years they've had to really rely on their defense. If there was ever a 10-point deficit, if a team scored 20 points, that kind of felt like a death sentence. This year, man, Russell Wilson in 3 games so far, they're averaging over 30 points. He's averaging a passer rating of 106. He's got 6 touchdown passes, another 1 rushing. Pittsburgh's offense is now really showing that they can hold their own, which to me makes them a legit contender in the AFC.
Yeah, Jared, your breakdown of yesterday's game was pretty thorough. And if I hadn't watched it, I'd have a pretty good idea of how that played out and all the drama. But you missed the biggest moment. And that was the 32-yard contested touchdown catch by Mike Williams, his one and only catch in a Steelers uniform in his debut. But to me, that was the biggest moment of the game, because not only because it gave them the 28-27 lead, but because it was emblematic of what they brought Mike Williams there to do,
Right.
and why they made the switch at 3-1 from Justin Fields, who was executing the offense at a reasonably high level, to Russell Wilson. They went from good to great as an offense. And I think that game yesterday, look, I've been higher on the Commanders than a lot of people dating back all the way to the summertime, because I thought that they have all the pieces in place now, with a culture that's being built by Dan Quinn, an exciting young quarterback, enough weapons on offense, a really good defense to be a team that can ruin somebody's day in the NFC, and maybe more than that. But what the Steelers are, they've always been a stingy, swarming, opportunistic defense that forces a lot of turnovers, gets a dominant and consistent pass rush with Highsmith and TJ Watt. But yesterday you saw the Pittsburgh Steelers 2.0 and why they're going to be so successful. It's airing it out to George Pickens on one side of the perimeter and Mike Williams on the other. And you're still going to rely on that defense, because on that final drive, if TJ Watt doesn't tip Jaden Daniels' hand on 2nd down, who knows how the rest of that possession goes? Who knows what happens on that play rather than an incompletion? So you have all the ingredients in place now for the Steelers to be one of the more complete teams in the league. And I look at them right now, Jared, if you're just going to look at the entire NFL, I think they're a top 5 team in the NFL today and moving forward, which is really fascinating to think about where we are now compared to where we were looking at the Steelers from back in Russell Wilson's first game against the Dallas Cowboys, and what they've developed into in such a short amount of time.
Yeah, and I put it out there yesterday, just saying, like, especially after the Texans loss, like, I think the Steelers are a top 3 team in the NFL. You could talk me into them being number 2 in the AFC. I would still put Kansas City and Buffalo ahead of them in that light. But if you had to, make me pick, or do I think the Steelers or Ravens are better? It'll be a homer pick, and I get that I'll be called biased for it. But the Steelers have a defense. The Ravens have shown that they do not.
Especially late in games. And I think that what's really been critical for the Ravens is they have all of the pieces to be a dominant defense, but we've now seen 2 or 3 late game meltdowns, some that have cost them, but particularly, the game was out of hand in Tampa Bay, but the Buccaneers came roaring back, where if they would have scored a touchdown and got an onside kick, who knows what would have happened there. You think back to even Thursday night, that game should have been over, but Burrow was able to mount a late charge in that game. It's these late game collapses that I think are going to be the Achilles heel for the Ravens, because I don't know that I'm betting against anybody else in the AFC when you have Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry doing what those two are doing. But the Steelers are a more complete team, and the Bills are a more explosive team, and Kansas City is just going to be Kansas City, and they're going to find ways to win every single week.
Yeah, and even if, they go into a game, they'll play Kansas City on Christmas. That'll tell us a lot about who they are, especially, with the playoffs shortly after that. But it's different. There's a difference between being a playoff team and being an actual contender. We've seen them be playoff teams in the past couple of years, but it's been as the 7 seed, where they'll go to Kansas City and Arrowhead, where they're just completely outclassed and outmatched, or you go to Buffalo with Mason Rudolph and no TJ Watt. And it's like, all right, this is kind of all for ceremony at this point, where the Bills are going to win or the Chiefs are going to win. It feels like they can actually at least win a game, maybe become something like a Titans team in 2019 that kind of has a little bit of a run and gets to an AFC title game. I think that with all the pieces they have, they're capable of doing that. And it's cool to see as a Steelers fan, finally, like an offense that the team can lean on, and that's good to see. Speaking of Buffalo, they traveled to Indy yesterday. Yes. And defeat the Colts 30-20. Wasn't a pretty game by any means, but a good defensive showing from their utility players. Defensive tackle Austin Johnson gets his second interception in as many weeks. Taron Johnson starts the game off with a pick 6 and has a sack. Taylor Rapp gets an interception. They have a fumble recovery from DeMar Hamlin off a Greg Russo strip. Josh Allen ran for a touchdown. Wasn't the best day passing, but compared to the last time they were without like multiple big-time pass catchers against Houston, when he went 9 of 30, there's a reason. That's basically the catalyst that said, okay, let's go trade for Amari Cooper. Well, you didn't have Amari Cooper, didn't have Keon Coleman. Mac Hollins has a career-high 86 receiving yards. Allen rushes for a touchdown. James Cook gets a touchdown. So I think the story of this game for me was the Bills' utility guys, their role players stepping up when they needed to, compared to a few weeks ago when they needed them to, and they kind of fell short. So now they go into a game against Kansas City, labeled as the game of the week. 8-2 versus 9-0, and they have a very strong chance if they win that game, if they get a little bit of help, to be the number 1 seed in the AFC. And we've been here before, and we're going to probably be here again. But Buffalo continues to show that, hey, as long as you've got 17 under center, things are probably going to be okay.
For sure. I think that yesterday was really a testament to their depth and just the complete roster that they have, because it didn't matter that their top 2 offensive weapons in the passing game were out, because you can lean on a James Cook. You didn't need Josh Allen to play hero ball, but when you needed a big play, like at the end of the half to set up the field goal going into halftime, he's capable of scrambling around and launching a ball 42 yards downfield with enough time to kick the field goal to get you some points going into the break. So it's just the depth and the quality of players they have across the roster. And, I spoke to a rival AFC executive last night after that game, and I just said, what stood out to you there? And he said, quote, it's a team rather than a group of players. And you have a head coach who's tapped into that locker room, and there's a lot of mutual respect there. And when you think about some of these teams that have as much talent as the Bills have, that a lot of times you'll see those teams kind of flounder because they're collections of talent rather than teams. But that doesn't happen in Buffalo. I mean, you think about how many teams across this league, if you take away the top 2 weapons in the passing game, it alters completely what you do. Look at Philadelphia when they went down to Tampa Bay with A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith on the shelf, and they get boat raced out of the building against the Buccaneers. That didn't happen yesterday in Indianapolis. The defense stepped up with big plays, timely turnovers. James Cook was a dominant force in the ground game, and when they needed a play, Josh Allen made it. So I think that yesterday was really a testament to how complete the Bills are. And, I hesitate to put them in that upper echelon with teams like the Chiefs and the Steelers and the Ravens. I think they're just kind of on the bottom tier of that tier, but they're going to have a chance to prove me wrong when they take on the Chiefs coming up here.
Yeah, and they've typically gotten the best of Kansas City in the regular season matchup. We kind of know the story there with the head-to-head matchups with Allen and Mahomes. It's just, can they get over that hump? And we'll see if this will be the year to do that. Speaking of Philadelphia, they go to Dallas, and can we just be done with Dallas at this point? Like, Dak's done for the year. It's going to be some combination of Cooper Rush and Trey Lance, and we saw what that's going to look like. They get absolutely blown out. Ezekiel Elliott has a fumble on the goal line. There's a lot of turnovers, interceptions. Philadelphia, obviously, the much better team with a much better quarterback, and I think just a better infrastructure internally as well. And then Jerry Jones goes on another one of his tangent rants after the game to say, we don't need to put curtains in front of the windows or anything like that. Or well, maybe
I will guarantee you CeeDee Lamb lost that ball in the sun. When you watch that play in the
exactly.
End zone, he did not even react to the football being in the air.
Yep.
If I'm Jerry Jones, if I'm Stephen Jones, if I'm Mrs. Jones, watching that play out, my first move is we need to get some sort of curtain or shield or doors that we can close to block those windows, because it makes a great photo op in the 415 window. You're going to see one of those pictures on ESPN.com splashed across with like the cool sun rays coming in. But when you start impacting the game like that in your building with your team, that's when I think it's a wake-up call that maybe this was a little bit of a design flaw. But I'll tell you what, Jarrett, no real design flaws with this Eagles defense right now. I mean, we can talk all we want about Saquon Barkley as an MVP candidate. We can talk all we want about the Eagles winning by asking Jalen Hurts to do less and be more effective with what he's been doing and answering that bell. But really, I think this underplayed story right now is this Eagles defense is playing at an elite championship level. 5 turnovers yesterday. Look, I get it's the Dallas Cowboys, but it was Nakobe Dean with an interception last week that turned the tide in the last moments to preserve that win against the Jaguars. The players are buying into Vic Fangio. Vic Fangio is more familiar with the players in his scheme. And look, what was the biggest issue with the Eagles a year ago down the stretch during that disastrous closing 10-game stretch? Terrible play in the secondary, terrible quarterback play. Well, Cooper DeJean, the second-round pick, and Quinyon Mitchell, the first-round pick at corner, one's playing like a defensive rookie of the year candidate, and one's playing like he deserves to be a starting corner and has been in this league for a long time, and they're rookies. So I think they're starting to figure it out. They're playing complementary football, and, when the Commanders come into town on Thursday night, that's going to tell you a lot about both teams and how seriously to take both teams as far as their championship aspirations. But I look at the Eagles right now, other than maybe Detroit, I don't know who there's another team in that side of the bracket that you can point to and say, that's the team to beat. That's the team that can go to a Super Bowl.
Yeah, and Thursday night, like you pointed out, I mean, there's a lot of, obviously, the division rivalry part of it, but a couple years ago when they got off to a really hot start and Washington came to town with Taylor Heineke, they kind of put a little bit of water on the flames of the Eagles. So we'll see if Jaden Daniels and co can do that this coming week. Let's talk about the Chiefs real quick, though. There's a lot of angry fans on the interwebs talking about voodoo magic and things of that nature with this team after winning, after blocking a Will Lutz field goal at the buzzer to preserve a win and get to 9-0 going into week 11. I don't know what else to say about Kansas City that hasn't already been said a million times. They find a way to get it done. This was a game against an inferior opponent, albeit a division opponent, where things, kind of go out the window a little bit when you see each other so often. But they fall behind. I think it was 14-3 pretty quickly. The Broncos scored 2 touchdowns, including a Cortland Sutton touchdown from Bo Nix. Mahomes had Kelsey wide open in the end zone, in the back of the end zone. He kind of airmails it. Like, this has kind of been the story of them all year, where it's close at the end, and somehow, some way, they always find a way. Whether it was against Cincinnati early on, they hold on to beat Baltimore, the fiasco in Atlanta. Like, this has just kind of been their MO, where, all right, we'll keep it close, and we'll pull it off late and get out with a win. And they do it again. I am interested to see if they can do such a thing against a really good Buffalo team going on the road to Buffalo this weekend to continue this streak. But I do think that there are cracks in the armor of Kansas City.
Listen, it's weird when you're 9-0. But I can look at it and say, I think they're just a hair off. Because, you talk about missing Jason Kelsey, airmailing him in the back of the end zone. How many throws have we seen downfield to Xavier Worthy?
He had another one yesterday where Worthy could have walked in.
Right, in the fourth quarter along the sideline. If he hits him, he walks in for a touchdown. And that's been the story all year. But that feels like one of those things where if you calibrate the timing just a little bit and those two get on the same page, you're talking about them being what the Detroit Lions are proving themselves to be this year, which is the runaway favorites as the best team in football. But the fact that they're surviving Patrick Mahomes, by Patrick Mahomes standards, having a mediocre year, and you're undefeated, to me, that's a testament and a statement of their dominance, right? Because dating back to last year even, they weren't winning with offense. They led the league in drop passes as a receiving core a year ago. Patrick Mahomes wasn't the MVP last year for a reason. It was Lamar Jackson. They're winning because Steve Spagnuolo's defense is just swarming to the quarterback. And they started off a little sluggish against Bo Nix, but they tightened the screws in the second half as far as sacks, as far as turnovers, forced fumbles, all of those things. And I think Kansas City, you're going to find ways to win when you're that good. If you position yourself to be in a spot to win a game and you have 15, you're going to win a lot of those games. Just look at Tampa Bay. Look at Baker Mayfield's reaction when he lost the coin toss. He knew that if you give Patrick Mahomes the ball in that spot, they're going to rip your heart out and spike it, and that's going to be the end of the game. And that's exactly what happened. And yesterday, it's one of those deals where until there's 3-4 zeros on that clock, you haven't beaten Mahomes. Just because you ate up the last 5 minutes and 43 seconds to get in a position to kick a chip shot field goal, until it goes through the uprights, you haven't beaten them. So, again, I think the Chiefs, I don't know that they're the best team in football today, but if they just get a hair better in some key areas, especially in the passing game, look out.
Yeah, and talking to our mutual buddy Matt Verderame about this, where he pointed out the similar thing when it comes to Xavier Worthy. He's like, if they hit on half of these things, he's probably got 8, 9, 10 touchdowns this year. It's just they can't seem to find that compatibility yet. So it's that thing with Kansas City where I'm not going to bet against them because we thought that last year was kind of going to be the year where they take a little bit of a step back. We thought that. Once they traded Tyreek Hill, that was going to be the year where they took a step back and they won the Super Bowl in both years. So it's one of those things where, I'll believe it when I see it when it comes to Kansas City's, downfall or what have you. Something does feel off though with the offense, but when you have the best defense in football and the best quarterback in football, they seem to find a way. One team that didn't find a way yesterday somehow, the Houston Texans, after having not one, not 2, not 3, not 4, but 5 interceptions of Jared Goff, and they still found a way to lose to the Detroit Lions. I don't know what to make of that. I don't know when the last time that happened where you pick off a guy 5 times and you lose. But that says a lot to me about a Houston team that started off this game very hot and looked very determined to turn the page from an embarrassing loss to the Jets the week prior on Thursday night. And they came out hot in doing so. But there were, a lot of misses by CJ Stroud. One in particular, he had Tank Dell, who was in a separate county than every other Detroit Lions defender, seemingly. He throws it a little bit late. Carlton Davis gets his second interception of the half. And that, I think, was kind of a to some degree. Carlton Davis had an interception to start the second half as well, and that kind of got things going for Detroit after a rusty first half that featured a lot of turnovers. But the Lions, to me right now, they are the best team in football, and you can dominate teams all you want and whatnot, but I think once you face some adversity in a game, that kind of shows us who you are. 5 interceptions and coming back from a double-digit deficit to still win, that tells us a lot about this Detroit Lions team. They're the best team in the NFC, best team in football, like I said, in my opinion right now, and they look like an absolute wagon even when they have their lowest of lows offensively like they did on Sunday night against Houston. They can still find a way to beat you.
Oh, totally agree. And not only are they the best team in football right now, but a win like last night, that's the type of win. You're on the road, you overcome 5 turnovers. That's the type of win that, galvanizes a team, brings them together, and you realize, okay, if we can overcome this, who's going to beat us? And it just
Right.
reinforces that confidence and that culture and that hyper-competitive culture that Dan Campbell has built there since he walked into that building. And I just look at the way that they beat teams, right? It's the defense that we hammer, that we talk about with why the Chiefs are playing so well and why they're still undefeated, why the Steelers are so tough to beat, why the Eagles are turning a corner. Well, the Lions for the last year and a half have written the book on dominant defense, and they continue to do it. But they also run the ball really effectively with Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. There aren't that many two-headed monsters across the league that you can rotate those guys through, and you're facing, as a tired defense in the fourth quarter, a running back who's just as fresh as it's his fourth snap of the game instead of being his 40th in the fourth quarter. And it is your 40th or 50th snap as a linebacker or a defensive lineman. You know, that offense is different when Amon-Ra St. Brown is held under wraps, as he was for much of the first half, and all of a sudden you turn him loose, he breaks loose in the second half, and now Jared Goff looks like an MVP candidate again in that fourth quarter when Amon-Ra St. Brown is playing at such a high level, and they have the best offensive line in football. So when you start to talk about how you win in the National Football League in the year 2024, which is elite defense, solid quarterback play, running the ball, dominant offensive line, they check every box. And I don't know about you, Jarrett, but I think that last night was just another reminder of how high the separation is between Penei Sewell and every other offensive tackle in the league. I mean, they're sending him in motion. They're putting him out as a lead blocker in screen passes and not getting flagged for illegal guy downfield type of penalties. He's dropping pancakes every other snap. I mean, I just look at the Lions. They're a fine-tuned machine. They're the best team in football, and I think that they might be my favorite team to watch across the league this year. And I don't know who beats them. I mean, you could talk about the Steelers and what they do well and kind of being a mirror image of the Lions. You could talk about Patrick Mahomes against that team in a Super Bowl and what a great Super Bowl that would be. You could talk about what it would be like to pit Derrick Henry against that defense and that front seven. But I think that right now we're on a collision course of the Detroit Lions being in the Super Bowl against a team that's a mirror image, but do they have that intangible, which is the culture that Dan Campbell has built? You talk to people around the league. I know we might poo-poo culture, but people inside the league, when you ask them what separates them, it's the culture and it's the belief system they have in that building, and they're just reinforcing it every week with wins like last night's.
Yeah, and you brought up Sewell's performance. There was one play in particular where they ran a swing pass to Jahmyr Gibbs, and he's just 30 yards downfield, step for step, with Gibbs clearing a path. And that was just kind of emblematic of his performance throughout the night and, you know, really throughout his career, what he's been with the Lions. So on the other side of the coin with Houston now, they're going to win the AFC South, like by default at this point, just because every other team in that division is a dumpster fire. But, you know, if you're the 4 seed in the AFC, I mean, you're probably going to draw a Baltimore or a Pittsburgh, depending on who wins that division, who comes in second. And that's not exactly where you want to be. It's where they were last year, and they won a playoff game. But if you're a team, you know, if you're the Texans, you want to try to vie for as high of playoff position that you can get. But it feels like every week they fall further behind the likes of Kansas City and Buffalo, where now they're just trying to, you know, scratch and claw for the 3 seed rather than the 4 seed. I just think that right now they're one of those teams that is a playoff team, but I don't know if I can call them a true contending team right now.
Well, you lose Stephon Diggs, that's going to leave a mark on your offense, especially with how much you involved him early on in the year.
Yeah.
And CJ Stroud, listen, it was bound to happen to a certain extent. I don't know that you could have built right away on the rookie year that he had a year ago, but he's not the same quarterback. He looked like it for 2.5, 3 quarters last night, but he has not been the same top 10 quarterback in the league as a rookie throughout the course of this year. So I think I'm with you. They're a team that wins the division. They get in, but I just think that there's a line of demarcation between them and the other contending teams in the AFC, both in terms of talent, in terms of pedigree, all of those things. And if you're the Texans, I don't even know that that's the worst outcome in the world, because now you've seen this year, okay, we need to go and make sure that we get a 4th receiver just in case, or we need to go and shore up the offensive line a little bit to make Joe Mixon even more effective. Or, you know, we're getting great play from our 2 pass rushers. Let's go shore up the interior of that defensive line. You're starting to see the holes that you have in a division where nobody's really rising up to meet the moment or compete with them. You plug the holes this year, and the next year it's a third year for CJ Stroud where he's hitting his stride, and that's when you have the chance to really be all in.
Yeah, and like the offensive line for the Texans has been weird this year too, because they've been able to run the ball really well. Joe Mixon looks like a top 3 running back in football. They can't pass protect. And we saw a little bit more of that last night. Like James Houston had a nice night. Lee McNeil got to CJ Stroud a few times like that. He's the second most sacked quarterback in football right now, which wasn't the story last year. It's been a, very much, two sides of the same coin situation where, a lot of the explosives from Houston last year came off of, CJ having enough time in the pocket to just kind of let one rip. He hasn't had that time this year. Right. And with Nico Collins being hurt, and you pointed out the Diggs injury, they got a little bit more production from John Mechie last night. But when you take away all these, really elite talents and have a bunch of plug and play guys along with an offensive line that's struggling, that takes away from, what your ceiling can be. And we're seeing that kind of play out in real time.
Yeah, no, I agree. And the same sort of thing happened to the Dolphins, right? I mean, when you lose Tua and it completely undermines your entire offense, Tyreek gets hurt for a couple games and it changes what they do. San Francisco, I think, is the ultimate argument for this because, they seem like they're one of those Ferrari Formula One cars where if one chip, it doesn't function within what the rest of the car is supposed to do, the whole thing doesn't reach peak performance. I think that's very similar with a team like Houston. They have depth, but it might not be elite championship depth. In San Francisco, you saw, even though the numbers weren't off the charts, Christian McCaffrey's presence matters, and Nico Collins' presence in Houston matters, and so does Stephon Diggs. And it just seems like injuries have derailed them a little bit. And again, it's a young quarterback going through some growing pains that you would expect in his second year. They're going to win the division, as we've both said, but I don't know that they're going to be able to beat Baltimore, a Buffalo, a Pittsburgh, or a Kansas City.
Yeah. NFC West teams that won: the 49ers beat the Buccaneers, the Cardinals flattened the Jets. Cardinals still atop this division. They're 6-4 now, and they have a win over San Francisco, so they kind of control their own fate here. How do you see this thing going? Do we see the 49ers kind of get back into looking like the 49ers of old, even though Deebo Samuel was just trying to choke out the long snapper yesterday during the game? Now that Christian McCaffrey's back, or do we see the Cardinals kind of stay on this roll and surprise some people and host a playoff game?
Yeah, I think that game, the second game between the Niners and the Cardinals, is going to decide that whole division, because I don't think the Arizona is going anywhere. I mean, that defense is starting to ascend a little bit with Jonathan Gannon, and they're starting to really find their footing. Kyler Murray might be playing some of the best football of his career, and he had a great game yesterday, just carved up what used to be an elite Jets defense, but's fallen on hard times out there. But San Francisco, I have a really hard time looking at all the talent that they have in place. And I think that people undervalue Christian McCaffrey's importance to that offense. It's not just as a running back, but he's a threat when he has the ball in his hands. He's a decoy because you have to pay attention to him in the open field in the passing game, which creates other opportunities for George Kittle and Debo and Jawan Jennings and all those guys. If he's fully healthy again, they're going to be in the mix. They're just going to be. They're too talented. The pedigree is there. The experience is there. So I think it's a 2-team division, and I think it comes down to whatever happens in that second game between San Francisco and Arizona.
Do you put Los Angeles in that conversation? Because, they're still kind of lingering, but, they've had a lot of injuries this year. I wonder if, getting healthy at the right time could be a factor for them to kind of storm back and try to win this thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it all depends on what happens with the other two teams, right? If Arizona comes back to earth, if San Francisco can't shift it into fourth gear, just because of the kind of season it's been with nagging injuries to their stars up and down the lineup throughout the course of the season, if you build momentum and you're the Rams, they can certainly capitalize on that. I mean, it's a really dominant offense with Matthew Stafford, and you get Cooper Kupp back, and Puka is doing his thing, and Kyron Williams. They have the weapons. I just don't know that anybody is going to crack into that top 2 with San Francisco and Arizona. I really think they're the class of that division right now.
I love it. Justin Herbert and the Chargers get a big win over the Titans. I shouldn't say big win. The Titans aren't very good, but they continue to win games, and they, holding on to a playoff spot. It's amazing how much, you talked about culture earlier with Dan Campbell and the Lions. I think the same can be said about Jim Harbaugh and the Chargers, where it was just bad vibes for the past like year and a half with Brandon Staley, especially after blowing the big playoff lead against Jacksonville. I think ever since then, it's just kind of been a change was needed, and it came too late. But regardless, Jim Harbaugh in that building, Jesse Minter with the defense playing really well, Justin Herbert having a really efficient season, not, too big numbers wise and the big boom stats or anything like that. But the Chargers right now look like a really good overall team that can hold on to a playoff spot going into the postseason and, perhaps make a little bit of noise. It's night and day difference. And I think a lot of that has to do with the culture sustained by Jim Harbaugh.
I think first and foremost, it's the culture. And I talked to Jake Butt about that before the year he played for Harbaugh at the University of Michigan. And he said, basically, overnight, you're going to commit to the running game in a way that they haven't in Los Angeles in the last several years. You're seeing that start to play out. And I think that it's not asking Justin Herbert to do too much. We throw out the term game manager like it's some sort of negative. But if you're a quarterback who just goes out there and throws the ball 20, 25 times with the kind of talent that he has, the kind of arm talent and decision-making, and you're not asking him to, carry the weight of the offense on his shoulders entirely, 9 times out of 10, you're going to do okay. And Quentin Johnson is starting to step up and look like the first-round pick that they believe that he was. Nice little game yesterday with a touchdown catch. They're one of those teams that they're not going to win the division as long as Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes are in the AFC West. But they're probably the most complete team out of that the jumble of bag of the Raiders, the Chargers, and the Broncos. They have the pieces. They have the coaching staff. They're starting to get the buy-in.
Yeah, and yesterday, Gus Edwards had a nice game, 55 yards on 10 carries. J.K. Dobbins added 50. Justin Herbert himself, by the way, had multiple runs where he looked like he was like 04 Michael Vick, just like taking souls of Titans. It was incredible to see. So he had a rushing touchdown as well. So I think that there's something to that. Similar with Buffalo, right, where Joe Brady has kind of leaned into more of the side of we know we have Josh Allen, but that doesn't mean we have to throw it 50 times a game and make him do everything. I think the Chargers have very much adapted that personality and MO as well. It's okay, we know we have a really good quarterback, but if we can take a lot off his plate and just kind of dip into the well of, hey, go be Justin Herbert when we need you to, I think that there's a lot to be said about that, and it's paid off so far. They're currently 6-3. And yeah, in that division, I understand that Denver, started off 5-3, but they've lost their last 2, and I kind of expected them to kind of fall off a little bit. I think it's Kansas City, Chargers as the 2 teams in that division who will be, real playoff threats.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think the Chargers are right there. And it's similar to Washington, where they have the pieces in place that on the right day against the right team in the playoffs, they can play spoiler. And if you do that once in the playoffs, who knows what happens from there?
Absolutely. What have you got coming on the old Substack for everybody to check out?
Yeah, Mike Tanner and I have a podcast that'll be coming out tomorrow, each and every Tuesday. The Football Friday mailbag, where I, take questions from the readers and ask sources around the league to give their input on what's happening. And probably going to have a couple of mid-season awards. We're a little bit past the midway mark, but every team has now played their 9 games out of the 18 weeks, 17-game schedule. So handing out some awards later in the week as well.
Good stuff as always. And if you are watching this on YouTube, be sure to subscribe to the channel. If you're listening to it as a podcast, leave a review, leave a comment, do all of that fun podcast stuff. Appreciate everybody for listening. We will be back later on in the week on the Pump Fake. Take care till then. Matt, my friend, I always appreciate you hopping on, man.
Appreciate you, man. Thanks for having me on.
All right, guys. Take care till then. This is the Pump Fake.